Sometimes a little bit of home cooking is exactly what you need to get things back on track, and the Jets beat the Panthers in impressive fashion. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about Winnipeg's revenge game, a rubber match against the Florida Panthers, and what an impressive victory it was. We'll talk about why in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started right now. Now, like I said, the Jets yesterday beat the Florida Panthers 6-3, and while the scoreline was probably closer through the end of the game than Winnipeg would like, I would say that the actual performance itself was generally very much in favor of the Jets after the first 10 to 15 minutes. Winnipeg definitely controlled play, and the top line, after having an atrocious first outing against the Panthers last week, really showed up in a big way in yesterday's game where you watch them really dance around opponents, and you can kind of tell when they're really successful and what sort of style does not suit them. And I think it's very obvious, right? The Panthers came out very fast and aggressive through the first 5-10 minutes. And then once, the Jets started to control the pace of the game, slow things down, suddenly the first line really started to go to work. If it's a track meet style of game, the Jets are not really equipped for that. But if they play a more controlled, more, I would say, I don't know how to describe it, maybe a directed game where Winnipeg can kind of, manage the line matchups a little bit more cleanly, manage the line changes, and just slow the transition game down a lot, that is a huge advantage for Winnipeg. The Jets are not exactly a slow team like they were in past years, but they're still not like crazy fast, right? You still have a couple of skaters that are very clearly much more quick north-south, and some guys who are really good laterally. But for the most part, this team I wouldn't describe as like a really fast run and gun squad. That's not how this team plays. That's not how they're built. And I think that the way that Winnipeg won this Panthers game was that they basically forced the Panthers to try and match a slower tempo. And in this case, you could really tell that the Jets felt very confident. They were not afraid. And, after a rough first couple of minutes, they settled down and things looked pretty good. For a little bit there, I did think that maybe Ehlers should go on the top line, maybe play with Connor and Scheifele a bit, just because for a bit, the first couple of minutes, like I said, the Panthers were definitely controlling the pace. But once the game slows down a good bit, that's when you can keep Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde together, and they can start to do their thing. I think a lot of credit should go to the top line's performance overall this year. Compared to previous times together last year, this year, I feel like we get more positive performances out of them. It's still not perfect, and there are still some moments where you're kind of like, it could use some improvement, but overall, right, compared to what they were doing in the first run of games last season, much better this year. So, this was definitely one of their big games. Velarde scored, Connor had a goal, Scheifele had a hat trick. Really just a fun outing in the kind of game that I think Winnipeg probably needed. Not because, they've been doing badly this year, quite the opposite, but I just think, their pride was a little bit wounded after, a tough outing against, the Panthers the other night. And I'm sure that probably did stick in their minds. And apologies, I think I said Velarde scored. It was he assisted. It was a Scheifele goal, so my correction there. But generally speaking, the top line really involved. If you noticed lines that didn't do well, The Lowry line really had a tough night. I mean, they often eat a lot of the defensive minutes, so it's not really surprising. But I think you would hope for a little bit more from them. But I guess what I've said about this team in the past is that if one part of the team is maybe struggling, then another part will usually pick them back up. So it's just one of those situations where, if you have a weakness somewhere, somebody else steps up and answers the bell. And I think that that's the kind of team that this is. If one group has an off night, somebody's usually there to carry and elevate the play. So overall, a really strong performance. Kupari line did well. The Nemesnikov line was okay. I think Perfetti and Nemesnikov were a bit behind the play. Ehlers was definitely up for the outing, though. I thought that he had some really good rushes. There were some really nice back checks from him. He created a couple of good chances. And then he did have one, pretty blindingly terrible giveaway. I think it was at the end of the first period. But other than that, I thought he had a pretty typical outing for him for the past couple of games where he'll get some good shots, get into some dangerous areas, set up some good passes, just could not really hit pay dirt until he was on the power play. The power play, he had a great feed to Scheifele, and then later there was an extended, I would say, gosh, it doesn't technically count as a power play, but there were 4 forwards on the ice because the unit had just finished and Ehlers hadn't rotated off yet. And so he actually got credit for technically a 5v5 point from a Scheifele goal, but it was kind of like a power play 5v5, if you will. So fun there. And then, of course, at the end, Morgan Barron scores a couple of empty net goals, his first goals of the season. Kind of funny that the first one was like a really nice banked pool shot. I guess he has a future in billiards if he ever decides to go that route. If there was one thing that you maybe didn't love, it was probably just the PK. But I think this is one of the scenarios where you're also talking about the Florida Panthers, who have a supremely dangerous offense. Like Reinhart, Tkachuk, Bennett, Barkov. I mean, these guys are pretty loaded. So if you give them a man advantage, whether you can agree with the call or not, it's probably not going to go your way. So I think in the future, if the Jets face this Panthers team, say 7 games in the postseason, and you know exactly what postseason matchup that would be, then probably want to avoid giving them too many man advantages. But I think this was just a fun game, a great outing. It was a sellout. I think a lot of folks were really up for this one. Jets fans, I forget what the chant was. It might have been Brady's better or something. I couldn't quite hear on the broadcast, but yeah, it feels like this could be a really fun potential Stanley Cup Finals preview. Obviously, way in the future at this point, there's like 60 odd games to get through before we get to that point. But hey, I think we could all agree that having 7 games and a little bit of cardiac arrest is worth it if the Jets and the Panthers tangle in the postseason, because there's only one way that they can, and that is in a Stanley Cup final. So let's just root for that. That'd be pretty fun. And if we get to defeat our old friend and Paul Maurice, who wanted us to win the cup this year anyways, I think I could probably live with that. But I did talk a little bit about, the Jets' limiting speed and how that really changes the way that they play against top teams. And I want to focus on that a little bit because I think that that's a particularly important part of why this team this year has had more success and why it could be a potential issue if they can't do it in the playoffs. We'll chat about that in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, I did want to let you know about our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Now, if you're wondering why PrizePicks should be your first choice, they always put their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. PrizePicks even offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account. And if somebody gets hurt, no problem. Your lineup will still stay active. They even invented the flex play, which means that you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. Even if one of your picks doesn't hit, you can still double your money. Right now, you can even get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just guaranteed. And if you're thinking about maybe the game ahead on Friday, I would say, maybe it's time for the top line to have another shot of confidence. I know that I said last game I thought that they weren't really going to score as much. Turns out they were the top scoring unit on the ice for the Jets, so maybe it's time to go back to Scheifele over 1.5, maybe even 2 points. Same for Morrissey and Connor. Could be safe bets against the Pittsburgh team that's quite frankly been a little leaky recently. But the only way you can do that is by downloading the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL when you do to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. While we're at it, I did also want to tell you about our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you know that, it's often a bit of a surprise, right? You open up the app, you add something to your cart, and it looks like it's $30, but then when you go to check out, suddenly there's like 10 hidden fees, and you get hit with like a $60 to $70 ticket that you were not expecting. And Gametime totally gets it. They hate that stuff too. No one likes that kind of surprise, and that's why they want to offer you curated deals to make it easier to find the best prices on great seats. They even have a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And they even offer you seat views before you buy so that you'll always stay in the know about what you're actually paying for, right? I think if you're thinking about maybe some Jets games in the upcoming future, obviously through the end of November, not too many opportunities to do so, but starting in the beginning of December, Gametime will have access to plenty of Jets resale tickets, so it's a great opportunity to get to a game. And if you happen to be around Wrigley Field, they've even got something special, an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic. Go to the Gametime app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seating and 20 to 25% off on home plate seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about, the Jets' recent performances and specifically what they've done well and what they could maybe stand to improve upon. And I think this is really going to focus more on how the Jets can be successful, right? This is one of those things that's really haunted them the last few years, but the Jets do not tend to play well against fast teams. It's been a recurring problem, and it's partly because the Jets just aren't built to be a speedy, rapid, north-south sort of squad. When they face really rapid counters and stuff and teams that can pass really quickly around the slot, it does get to be a bit of a problem. The Jets don't have the time to react, and their guys aren't really fast enough to shut that stuff down. Recently, I think that they've gotten significantly better at handling it, and it's partly by helping to control the pace of the game. The Jets, I think, have done a better job of denying zone entries. I think that they've made the neutral zone really frustrating, and when they can start to hem in their opponents a little bit more aggressively and essentially trap them from making zone exits, that's when Winnipeg really starts to shine. I think the Jets have a good way of starting to roll their lines. And, in some games, it starts with the Lowry line. Other games, it maybe starts with the Nemesnikov line. Sometimes the top line comes out swinging, and they already have, the opponent's number. Things are looking good, and the Jets are in control. But I think for Winnipeg specifically going forward, I wonder about how you can consistently dictate that pace, right? The top line is usually the one that starts out first, and I almost wonder if it might be more helpful to start with somebody else. At the very start of the game, usually it's like the Lowry line, but when you're looking at, key deployments after that, right, maybe the Nemesnikov-Ehlers pairing with Perfetti might help to set up initial offensive zone possession, right? Wear down the opponents. Ehlers does this thing with the perimeter play that just really drags guys out of position and slows them down, forces them to try and adapt. And I think on the first Scheifele goal yesterday, that Nemesnikov line did a really good job of wearing down the Panthers. And then the Jets were able to get a line change, and the Scheifele unit comes on. And at that point, it's just globetrotters against tired skaters. And it makes me wonder if maybe the Jets should rethink their sequencing. Not that you have to play the top line less, but if you put them out there, maybe if you can find a way to soften up the matchup that they're facing before with somebody else who sort of wears down the opposition and maybe gets that line change, especially on home ice, a little bit faster, maybe that can be a way that you can keep the top line cooking. On the road, obviously, you don't have as much control there, but the Jets have generally played really well on the road, so I don't think you have to worry about that so much. Granted, the Jets haven't faced a lot of teams that I would worry about in terms of the speed issue, but what we have seen from Winnipeg so far is that in a lot of these games, they've generally controlled the tempo, and I think just frustrating opponents continues to be the really successful thing. If there's one thing that I may worry about a bit, it's kind of what happens when you get to the playoffs, right? And this is really the sort of unspoken concern heading into the postseason is Winnipeg itself hasn't always been able to control the pace of the game against really fast teams. Sometimes if the Panthers or Colorado or some of these other teams just don't slow down and you can't stop them through the neutral zone, it puts Winnipeg on the back foot way too frequently, and the Jets really struggle with zone exits. That's been a continuing problem for a few years now, and it's not like I expected it to get much better this year. I'd say that they've done better this season compared to others, but it's still not a great thing. And when the Jets get pressured and hemmed in like that, they tend to fall apart, like we kind of saw in the Saturday Panthers game. It's very rare that they've had it happen this year, but I think when you're facing the same opponent for a series, that's why, the Avs series kind of went the way that it did. You only face them a couple of times in the season, relatively speaking, but then you face them for 7 straight in the playoffs, up to 7. Obviously, it can be a bit of a different experience once that opponent starts to figure out where you're weak and, how to start to pick apart your transition game, how to keep you hemmed in, and which skaters are the ones that you want to target, whether it's somebody on the back end, maybe a line matchup, something like that. And I think the Avs did a really good job of taking advantage with that because let's be truthful, right? Like the Avs have a couple of game-breaking guys who can play like 30-plus minutes a night, and the Jets don't nearly have that same kind of roster composition. The Jets are a team that's really built to win by committee. Now, what's great about that approach is that the Jets are very deep, right? The Avs this year, not that deep. Winnipeg, on the other hand, all 4 lines have had some really standout performances this year. It's like rare that you really see any particular line have a bad night. Usually if somebody is struggling, it's probably a sign that the rest of the team is also struggling. So overall, I think Winnipeg has a very balanced approach. The score sheet for this team continues to show lots of guys getting involved. It's not like it's all coming from a couple of skaters. It's a pretty well-balanced score sheet for the Jets with everyone chipping in, barring the 4th line. That's the only group that does not score. It's a little funny. I feel like they're a little bit unlucky. They do really well in their matchups and eat their minutes alive. So it's just a matter of time that's, before the floodgates maybe start to open a little bit for them and they start putting in a few past the opposing keepers. But I think the biggest thing for the Jets, especially in the playoffs and really for the rest of the season, is figuring out how to manage your opponent's speed. How do you make opponents play to Winnipeg's tempo? You solve that question, especially against teams like Colorado or Vegas or the Panthers, and I think you're going to start really cooking in the playoffs. Obviously, none of this is guaranteed, and anything can happen once you get to the playoffs. Maybe the Jets even don't face one of these teams. Maybe they just face bigger, heavier teams where Winnipeg can kind of win those matchups. But I think Winnipeg is as competitive a team as anyone else right now, and I think that's why it's great to think about all of the options that they have to improve the roster, maybe seek out some internal upgrades, bring in some prospects later this season. The sky really feels like it's the limit. And after everything, the Jets are still in first place. They've only lost a couple of games this year. Carolina is the only team that's really catching up to them in the standings, but Winnipeg is still clear at the top, right? By 4 points, which is pretty dang impressive. Obviously, the Canes do have a game in hand, so if they win tomorrow, they will just be 2 points behind the Jets. But, I think it really speaks to Winnipeg being such a consistent team and, game in and game out, really putting pedal to the metal. I mean, this team really hasn't slowed down. We really haven't seen them struggle as much as you might expect from other years. And, they've conceded among the fewest in the league. They've generally scored the most, 80 goals already through just 19 games. So really impressive team. And I do actually want to spend some time talking about what we can take away from about 20 games into the season, right? We're almost roughly a quarter of the way through, and I think you're starting to get a firmer sense of what this Jets team is, what they are, really good at, maybe what they could work on, and what they might need to acquire in a couple of months, especially as more and more names are starting to come out as being available for trade. Morgan Frost is being talked about as a pretty desirable asset on the market. It sounds like he and the Flyers are going their separate ways pretty soon. David Jiricek might be available too. There's a lot of young players out there who might be disgruntled with their current teams and who could potentially fill in for the Jets and become either, immediate players to rely upon, or maybe some guys for the future to consider as part of the next great Jets core. But we'll chat about how the Jets are looking about 20 games in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Obviously, as a Ravens fan, last weekend, not so good for me. The Chargers game on Monday will be a chance for some redemption, but let's be real. I kind of expected us to lose in Pittsburgh. It always happens. And maybe you're getting the same hunch in the middle of one of your games. Maybe you're watching the Vikings and you're thinking, the Vikings have a pretty good defense this year, but something about this matchup just doesn't feel right. Well, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. It helps you make the most informed bets possible and helps you win big. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started. You will start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's only at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us. On tonight's episode, we're just chatting a little bit about, the Jets so far, and we're about 20 games in. This is probably about the point at which how the Jets have played gives you some window of insight into how they're going to play for the rest of the season. And I think this Jets team is very interesting. I think that they're a bit of a hodgepodge of different things. A team that wins by committee, that kind of has a different hero of the night, but there are a couple of really consistent things that you notice almost every game. The first thing that's probably worth talking about is the special teams, right? And more specifically, the power play. The power play, when it's 5v4 for the most part, is just, it's best power play we've had in probably 6 or 7 years. We haven't had a unit this good since the Line A years, right? And even that unit, I don't know if it had the same level of elite dynamism that this unit has. Ehlers on the first power play unit has really added this element of unpredictability and skill. And already, Davis, I think, has done a really good job of, having guys rotate, cycle, and really create an off the puck movement, which has confused opposing defenses. PK Diamonds get stretched. They lose track of players. And the Jets have some really elite finishers on this unit. And then that's before you even look at a guy like Velarde, who can be a net front presence and who has the hand-eye coordination to do that little classic move of his where he sort of spins around, almost does a bit of almost like a halfway Cruyff turn and, creates some absolutely dangerous chances right down low. So the Jets have all of these ways to skin the same cat, and I think that's why this first power play unit has been so good. But I feel like that also sort of overshadows a little bit how good the second unit has been. I feel like the second unit deserves quite a few roses. They're very direct. They can kind of crash the crease, and they create some really good scoring opportunities. They've actually punched in a fair few goals this year. Don't know how many it is off the top of my head, but overall, both power play units have very different looks, but both bring their own forms of extreme danger. And so I really have to commend, the Jets coaching staff for bringing Payne in. He's been awesome. Chenoweth, I have some thoughts on. I think he's done a really good job of getting the PK up to a much more manageable position. It's still not perfect, and I think it's going to be one of those things where the Jets have a more league average PK. But you know what? If the PK is middle of the pack or even somehow in the top half of maybe the top 15 teams, I would be thrilled, right? Compared to where the PK was in previous years, this unit is so much better. We used to be like dead last in the league, and now we're at least league average, which is a significant improvement. I really can't say enough about how much of a difference that makes when your PK can actually stop scoring opportunities. I know that this probably sounds a little bit ironic considering the Panthers scored twice on the power play yesterday, but it's also the Panthers, right? They just do that kind of stuff. They have the talent to where even the best PK units are probably going to concede. But overall, special teams, marvelous. I would also give a lot of credit to Arneal. I think the way that he's managed the bench and he's done a good job of balancing sending messages while also giving guys room to breathe has really been helpful. The way that he uses his deployments, I think, has also been fairly balanced. You're generally seeing a pretty good rolling of four lines, and it seems to have had a pretty nice impact on how this team plays. Winnipeg's 5v5 play, I think, is a little bit, I don't want to say a work in progress or anything, but that's probably the best way to think about it. They do probably need to create a few more chances here and there, which is weird to say about a team that's finishing this much, but I think that that's probably why, you maybe want to get a little bit more often than the crease and slot, just because the Jets shooting percentage as a team probably isn't going to stay at like 1,000,000,000% like it is right now. So at some point, you're going to have a little bit more of a scoring drought compared to what the Jets are doing now. And so having perhaps a little bit more of a sustainable way of creating offense might end up being, the best way to keep this pattern up, right? To help you get through some of those shooting percentage dips, especially with, how this team is constructed. Again, like I said, it wins by committee. And I think that, this team has enough to where every night they're going to be competitive. There's only going to be a few games that they play this year that probably look the way that they did against the Panthers. Otherwise, I think the Jets will always have a chance. And if they can more consistently create good 5v5 offense up and down the lineup, they're going to be in pretty good straits, right? And you know what? You never really question the effort with this team. They've really given their all for the most part. Only a couple of games where they look like they'd maybe been celebrating a little bit after setting some real historical records. But yeah, I mean, you really can't fault them for wanting to celebrate some really special milestones this season. And it's only 19 games in, right? So really a sign of things to come. And overall, just a really fun team to watch. I think that that's the biggest takeaway. And when you see empty seats in the arena, you just wish that, in my case, I wish I was there because, me living way outside the country would have been nice to get up there more often for a couple of games. But I know the fan attendance has started to really increase. It seems like Winnipeg is really starting to embrace the team again. And, it's wonderful to see folks filling the stands, getting back to games. I know for a couple of seasons, it was hard to really justify wanting to go. I mean, the team, in my mind, didn't really deserve fans' support. But now they're there, they're cooking, and I hope it continues. But, I guess one of the last things that's worth talking about is the goaltending. I know Hellebuck's save percentage has taken a little bit of a hit the past couple of games, but he still is like insanely above league average. League average is like 901. He's probably around a 921 or a 922 right now. I didn't look as of yesterday, but I mean he's at a 923 right now. So he's cooking pretty nicely. Comrie has been more than capable as the backup. And it just feels like this team has such a nice foundation to build on. If there's one thing that I really would like them to see about getting, it's finding a second line center somewhere. I would not, have a great sense of who's going to be that fit right now. But, in a couple of weeks, maybe a few months, it'll start to become a little bit clearer as teams start falling out of the playoff races. Maybe the Jets can swing a big trade. If ever there was a year that felt like it could be a great year for the Jets to really go for it, really swing big, and I know that that's not usually what they do, but this year, with the field not really being that impressive, this could be a big season to make a big play. The Jets have some great assets to trade with. They are on an absolute hot streak. And I know people will say, well, you don't want to mess up the chemistry. And it's true. But I think the biggest thing is that the second line center role is something the Jets can absolutely improve upon. And maybe getting Vlad into a more depth role where he can be, 15 or 12-minute a night menace rather than asking him to have to really become, a prime offense creator in the second line role might suit him more, especially as a winger. So a second line center that's younger, maybe a better finisher, somebody who can keep up with the way that Ehlers and Perfetti play, that might just do the Jets quite nicely. If they can add a depth defender somewhere, wouldn't hate that, but I think your 2C is probably your single biggest need, and I don't know that the Moose are necessarily going to be able to fill that. So we'll keep an eye on that position for now. I think Vlad has done about as much as he can, be asked to, so I want to give him credit for that. But if the Jets add a great 2C somewhere, somebody who can really, pick up and become an even more dangerous set of skates for Ehlers and Perfetti to play off of, yeah, this team is going to have a really fun postseason run. But still several months away. All that said, I am already thinking about the playoffs. So you kind of get the sense of where my mind is right now. But curious to know what you're thinking. How have you felt about the start of the season? Are you thrilled with the progress the team has made? Are you worried about it? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll have a preview of the upcoming weekend slate of games. We have Pittsburgh, of course, and then we have a game on Saturday against the Predators. First time we'll be seeing Nashville. It starts a bit of a slate through the Western Conference, lots of Central Division and a couple of Pacific squads, but in due time, we'll see them. And then finally, we get back to home ice in December, which is great. Been a little bit too long away from the Canada Life Center confines. So stay tuned for that. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you here tomorrow, so stay tuned. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.